Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring global warming, but going a little deeper than the usual stuff, a little more insightful. And our main source, well, it's a text called Global Warming, Truth and Reflection. And get this, it was originally written in Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we figured why not get a different perspective?
Yeah, a different part of the world, different way of looking at things.
Exactly. So this text, it doesn't mess around. It jumps right into debunking that whole global warming is a hoax thing.
Right.
I mean, that might seem obvious to a lot of our listeners,
Yeah.
but I thought it was really interesting how they tackled it.
Yeah, and it goes beyond, just the science, which is pretty well established at this point. They actually point to the evidence, like rising temperatures,
Right.
glaciers melting.
And all the crazy weather we've been having.
Exactly. Like it's all right there. Hard to ignore.
It is. It is. Now, one thing that really stood out to me was how they talk about the complexity of this whole thing. They basically argue that it's not just about cutting carbon emissions.
Yeah. There's more to it.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's not that simple.
And they actually break down all the different sources of heat that are impacting the planet.
Oh, interesting.
You've got solar radiation, obviously,
Okay.
human activity, but beyond just fossil fuels.
Okay.
Natural stuff like volcanoes.
Oh, right.
And even, get this, heat from living organisms.
Wow, so it's like everything's contributing a little bit?
Exactly. It's a whole system.
So if we just focus on carbon emissions, what are we missing? Like, what's the danger there?
Well, for one thing, you could end up hurting developing nations if they're held to the same standards as, more developed countries.
Right.
And then there's the whole issue of, it becoming a political tool.
Oh, I see. Like manipulation.
Yeah, using it for economic advantage.
Wow. Makes you think, right? Like, how often do we even hear about global warming and it's not just about carbon emissions?
Yeah, not very often. This text really makes you broaden your perspective. It does. It does. And that leads us to another interesting point they bring up. They call it carbon politics.
Carbon politics, okay.
Basically, it's this warning about how climate concerns, well, how they can be manipulated for political reasons.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they talk about things like carbon taxes being used as trade barriers, or some countries using green technology to, boost their own economies.
Right.
Or even using environmentalism to, target their rivals.
Wow. So using it almost as a weapon.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, have you ever seen, I don't know, any real-world examples of this carbon politics actually happening?
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, it is.
Because this text is suggesting it's a real problem.
It is. And I think the bigger point here is we got to be critical.
Yeah.
We can't just accept every solution that's presented to us. We got to ask, is this really about saving the planet or is there something else going on?
Right. Are there ulterior motives? What are the motivations here?
Exactly. That's the key question.
It is. Now, before we get too deep into the politics of all this, let's get back to the text's main message. What do they propose we do about all this?
Well, they're really calling for a balanced approach to dealing with global warming.
Balanced.
One that considers all the different factors we talked about.
So not just like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly. And it shouldn't be driven by, political agendas.
So a more holistic approach.
Exactly. Recognizing all the complexities.
Got it.
They really emphasize the importance of international cooperation.
Okay.
Based on scientific evidence.
Right.
And sharing responsibility fairly. But they also warn about, manipulation by certain groups.
Right.
Because even well-intentioned solutions can have unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like you got to be aware of the potential downsides, too.
Exactly.
So I want to ask our listeners, how do all these geopolitical considerations, how do they affect how you think about solutions to global warming?
It's a good question.
Because it's a problem that affects all of us.
It does.
It really does.
It's interesting, though, how they, talk about those big geopolitical forces, but also remind us about what we can do as individuals.
Right. It doesn't let us off the hook just because it's such a huge problem.
Yeah, exactly. They really stress that every little bit counts.
When it comes to reducing our carbon footprint.
Yeah, making those choices in our everyday lives to, be more sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing that really stuck with me was how they talked about, being an informed consumer.
Oh, yeah.
Not just accepting whatever solution someone throws at us.
Right. We got to question things.
Yeah.
Look at different perspectives and then make choices based on the best evidence we have.
Right, and what aligns with our values, too.
Exactly.
It's easy to feel kind of hopeless about this whole climate thing.
Yeah.
But this text, it's almost like it's empowering in a way.
It is.
Like it gives us tools to actually do something.
Yeah, to be active participants, not just, sitting back and watching it all happen.
Exactly. And what I like is that they're not pretending to have all the answers.
Right.
They're not giving us like a one-size-fits-all solution.
It's more about giving us the knowledge.
Yeah.
And those critical thinking skills to, figure things out for ourselves.
So I'm curious for our listeners, as you're listening to this, what's really sticking with you?
Yeah.
What are the big takeaways?
Yeah, what are you going to remember?
What are you going to carry with you as you, deal with this whole global warming issue?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think for me, what stood out was that whole idea of balance.
Balance.
Yeah, like remembering that the solutions to these complex problems, they're usually not at the extremes.
Right.
We need to find that middle ground.
Okay.
Where we acknowledge how urgent it is,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also, thoughtful about the actions we take.
Right. So finding that sweet spot between personal responsibility and global cooperation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like you said, the scientific evidence and those political realities.
It all ties together.
That's the real deep dive.
It is.
It is. There's this one passage in the text that I keep thinking about. It talks about how solutions to global warming shouldn't hurt people's livelihoods.
Oh, interesting. Because we usually hear about, the economic costs of climate action.
Right. But this is kind of flipping the script.
Yeah, they're saying we need solutions that actually make people's lives better, not harder. Like sustainable development can go hand in hand with, economic growth.
Oh, I see. So it's not like we have to choose between the economy and the environment.
Right. They're challenging that idea.
Yeah.
They're saying we can find solutions that benefit both.
That's a good point. Like all those green jobs we hear about.
Exactly.
Like how switching to a more sustainable economy could actually create more jobs.
And they actually give examples of this in the text.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like investing in renewable energy,
Okay.
sustainable agriculture, eco-friendly infrastructure. They say these things can create jobs, help local economies, and improve people's lives.
So it's about changing how we think about it.
Yeah.
Not seeing climate action as this burden,
Right.
but as a chance to do things better for innovation and growth.
And ultimately a better future for everyone.
Exactly. Exactly. Reading this text, it reminded me of those old maps.
Yeah.
The ones with the blank spaces and the warnings about dragons.
Sleepy dragon.
Yeah, like we know where we want to go.
A stable climate.
Right. But the path to get there, well, it's not exactly clear.
It's uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And we got to figure out the best way to get there with all the, different factors.
And with so many people talking about this issue, it's kind of hard to know who to listen to.
It really is. And that's why, this whole critical thinking thing is so important.
Right.
We got to be able to, filter all the information out there, figure out what's actually true, and then, make good decisions based on that.
It's like we need our own compass to navigate this whole thing.
That's a great way to put it. And this text, it gives us some principles to follow. It reminds us about how real global warming is.
Right.
How complex it is, and how we need to, think about all sides of the issue.
Right.
And, of course, how important it is to cooperate with other countries.
Yeah, and what we can do ourselves.
Exactly.
So, as we're racking up this deep dive, let's think about you, the listener.
Yeah.
What can you actually do starting today to help with climate change?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything huge. Even small changes can add up.
Right.
Think about what you do every day, what you buy, how you get around.
What really resonated with you from this text?
Yeah, what stuck with you?
Maybe it's using less energy at home or trying out different ways to get to work. Or even, speaking up for better policies in your town or city.
Or just learning more about all this.
Yeah, the more you know, the better.
Exactly, because the main takeaway here is that everyone has a part to play.
It's true.
This text really highlights how individual actions, when enough people do them, they can really lead to bigger changes.
Well said. Well said. So as we finish up with global warming, truth and reflection, think about what you've learned and what you can actually do.
Remember, the future of our planet, it's not set in stone.
Right.
It depends on the choices we make, big and small. And yeah, the challenges are big, but we're capable of amazing things too.
That's a good point.
We can innovate, we can work together, and we can take action.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
And until then, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better future for all of us.